Good evening. We are now streaming live on YouTube.
Thanks, Karen. I'll go ahead and call the Senate Appropriations Committee to order, and Karen, please call the roll.
Sure. Senator Grew.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, you can excuse me?
Excused.
Thank you. Senator Steinmetz.
Excused. Okay, the first bill for our consideration.
Senator Perkins here.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
And I assume Senator Kinski, you are here as well.
I'm sorry. Jumping the gun. It's been a long day. Go ahead, Karen. Finish your job. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. I assume you are here as well.
Here, yeah.
Then yes, you do have a quorum.
And do we have anybody in the waiting room to talk about these bills?
At this point, I believe we do have Senator Boner. And there are a couple of others. I will go ahead and bring him in at this point. And then if anyone else desires to provide comment on this particular bill, I would ask that they raise their hand.
Okay. Welcome, Senator Boner. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 50. And of course, our role is just to look at any appropriations that are associated with the bill. If you want to proceed with presentation, we're all ears.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have is a Senate file that was originally meant for any second or third follow-on special session during last year. We've kind of modified it to and focused it instead on the current CARES Act funds we have, which have just been extended to the end of this calendar year, but also wanted and I'd bring a suggested amendment to your attention. Hopefully, I sent that to the committee last night, and I hopefully staff has a copy that would kind of modify it to not just distribute the current remaining CARES Act funds, but also any substantially similar federal funds that might be coming down the line. The idea being that we could provide some direction as to how and I'm sorry, I guess I should back up. This is dealing with business relief for ag businesses. And so the idea for having a separate bill and a separate program for agriculture is that it mirrored decisions at the federal level. For whatever reason, the federal government thought it'd be best to kind of make a different program for economic aid for agriculture, and we felt it was best to have something similar at the state level, if nothing else, to reduce confusion. So that's the idea behind the bill. Like I said, it started in the interim, geared towards a special session, but since we're in the situation we are now, we wanted to make some adjustments between a standing committee amendment we've already passed in ag and hopefully a proposed amendment that this committee will look at favorably to kind of have it geared towards not just the remaining roughly 100 million or so that's left with the current CARES Act, but also any future appropriations that might be coming down the pike. So, Mr. Chairman, with that being said, it's pretty straightforward. Right now we have $80 million, and that was a kind of a holdover from the interim. What I might suggest to the committee, in addition to the proposed amendment we've provided, to maybe say have some language along the lines of there's appropriate to the Wyoming Business Council up to $80 million. So there's a ceiling, I guess, and given the fact that we don't know what the details will be of any future appropriations from the federal government. Like I said, mostly looking to hopefully set some policy as to how this program will be administered, because there's some disagreement among our fellow legislators and with the way that the exact manner in which the governor went about his program in the fall, and certainly want to thank the governor for the fact that the program existed and the good that it did do a lot of good. If there's someone from the Business Council here, they could probably provide more detail, but if my memory serves, it's roughly $40 million was administered to ag businesses in a very short time frame to apply in the fall, a relatively short time frame to apply for in the fall. So I think the need's out there. As the virus persists, there's still disruption that's going to happen along our supply chain and agriculture and get our product to the consumer. And we just wanted to have the option of continuing the program and maybe having our say and put the legislature's fingerprint on any program that may be beneficial to agriculture. So that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and stop talking. If you have questions on the amendment or the bill, I would be more than willing to ask or answer them.
Thank you, Karen. If you could note that Senator Steinmetz has joined us. Before I open it up for questions, Senator Boner, if you could just continue your presentation a little bit. I'm unclear. I thought that all of the funds from the CARES Relief Act had been appropriated and dispersed. How do we reappropriate $80 million of funds that have already been expended?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that I think the governor's office has ideas as to, I forgot all the, you know, the exact terms better than me, whether they've been, I guess, allocated but not appropriated. And I think there's a January 5th memo, I believe, to Appropriations Committee from the governor's office going over the details. And frankly, I don't think that we exactly know how much is going to be expended until maybe a couple months from now. And so I've heard 100 million hasn't exactly gone out the door. I've heard that there's roughly 18 million that hasn't been, it's just kind of sitting there. There's no plans for it at all. And that's why I'd recommend ultimately, given the uncertainty, inserting some language along the lines of up to $80 million. Not saying there is $80 million appropriated, but setting a cap, if you will, based on what our the perceived need is. So I think that concept is fairly important as we continue to adjust this bill to suit our current situation.
So I'll open it up for questions. Karen, in the meantime, this January 5th memo, can you lay your hands on that? I'm not recalling it at the moment. Senator Perkins.
Thank you. My recollection was that from the January 5th memo was that, well, even more recently than that, I think that the unexpended funds were somewhere between, 16 to 19 million, but there were funds that were allocated out to the programs. And I guess the couple of questions I would have is, first of all, what do you remember, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, if we could, I'd like to know if we remember how much was allocated to the business interruption stipend program initially. What was the initial allocation to it?
You're directing that to Chairman Boner.
Yes, I have to direct it through you, Mr. Chairman. I can't ask Chairman
Yeah,
Boner
I wasn't sure which chairman. I wasn't sure which chairman.
The overall, I want to say overall, the Business Council has administered roughly 500 million in grants or loans to businesses throughout the state, if that's the question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I can just follow up with a couple questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my question really is do you remember what the original allocation to the business interruption stipend program was? Do you remember what the original allocation was, or do you know?
Mr. Chairman, I do not, and the amendment that I'm suggesting would eliminate all references to the business stipend interruption program, any reference to anything we did in the 2020 special session, and instead just focuses. It makes it more general. So it would basically read on section 2, there's appropriated to the Wyoming Business Council up to $80 million from any federal CARES Act or similarly purposed funds to be used for grants to agricultural business. So
thank you. Well, okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, as I look at as I was tracking in the Standing Committee amendment, I understand where we're eliminating at line 6 and 7, and then part of 8, you're eliminating these references to the interruption stipend program created by the 2020 Wyoming Special Session Laws, Chapter 3, Section 2B. You're taking that, but if you go to 1, well, and I guess the first question is 1, I don't remember the business interruption program being limited only to agricultural businesses. This seems to me to be a narrowing of that program to only agricultural businesses. Is that, am I misunderstanding or just remember wrong?
Mr. Chairman, that's why we're removing all references to anything we did in the past. I did send a copy of how the bill would read if this committee were to pass the amendment that I've suggested that this committee take up, as well as the one we did with the standing committee. And that's kind of going off of that handwritten, hand modified bill right now. So yes, if what I'm suggesting is that moving forward, if you do adopt the amendment, we simply say, that we wouldn't reference anything that we did in the special session. Instead, it would just simply say, we'd appropriate up to a certain amount of CARES Act or similar purpose federal funds.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I understand that, but even on line 6, you have that it's still, you're reappropriating this money to be used for grants to agricultural businesses. And I don't remember the program being limited to agricultural businesses before it was any business. And so if we did this, the effect of it would be that you would be reappropriating whatever the appropriation is. You're appropriated entirely and exclusively for agricultural business, and no other businesses would be available to take advantage of that appropriation, as I understand the bill and the intent of the appropriation. Am I wrong?
Mr. Chairman, that's
Senator Boner.
Like I said, we're trying to take this bill and adjust it for our current situation. And what I'm suggesting, if the committee were to vote for the proposed amendment, that would eliminate that effect. That's what we're trying to prevent. And so if the committee were to simply take up the amendment and also add, instead of appropriating $80 million, appropriating up to $80 million. Maybe we need some LSO to work on that language. It set a cap. And the minimum would be 0, so we wouldn't be taking up the entirety of the remainder of the appropriation.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me try to see if I can take a whack at this and try to go about this a little different way. Mr. Chairman Boner, because there's so many chairmen. Sorry. I've got, according to the numbers I have in front of me, there was $506 million allocated to the Business Council, of which 464 million went out for, and there's still 37 million that's encumbered. There was one program out of all the programs that was specifically for agriculture, although agriculture could have applied for any of the programs, but you didn't know what your losses were during all those other programs. So this was just, there was one $40 million program at the end for ag. Am I with you so far? Or are you with me?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay. And all that money, since it was such a short window for applying, that money didn't get expended, did it? I don't believe.
I'd have to go back and look exactly. And the reason for the bill is that there's some, I guess, dissatisfaction with the relatively short window.
Right.
And I believe the cutoff was sometime in November, and folks didn't necessarily have an opportunity to do all of the things that the Business Council was requiring in time. So that's the reason for the bill, I guess.
And so if I can follow up one more, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Okay, then so what you're asking, and what this appropriation is that if there are, yes, it varies and it's an open question. The remaining money from CARES Act 1, which could be somewhere between $19 and $100 million, depending on whose number you're looking at today, that you want us to appropriate or earmark, for want of a better term, sorry, $80 million out of CARES Act 1 money and any subsequent money that comes in a potential CARES Act 2 that is kind of in limbo in some respects. That what I got? And that's what that bill, that's the expenditure of money in this. So I guess the only question I have is what happens if it doesn't? I mean, I think it will, but are we going to be stuck owing you some money if we don't do it that way? Or we just pay up to? That's why you got the up to language?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's why I was suggesting the up to, so it'd be anywhere from $0 to $80 million.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further questions? Further questions or comments? Senator Perkins.
So I just want to make sure, I think, as what I understand it, is the intent is to take any and all unappropriated CARES Act money up to and including $80,000 to put it back into a business interruption program that is limited solely for agricultural businesses.
Mr. Chairman, that is not the intent at all. With the, that's why it's so important we insert some language that says up to $80 million, so that the actual amount will be anywhere from $0 up to $80 million. So that's how we need to modify the bill to make sure that we're not, so we address Senator Perkins' concerns there. It's not our intent to have any, special carve outs here that it's going to take up the entirety of the remainder. We just simply want to, like I said, the primary disagreement, just to get into some of the details, and we'll get into why more of the policy side of it. Is it going to be based on the amount of like a per head or per acre of crop type program? Is that what the payments will be based off, like the USDA program? Or are we going to, is any future program going to be like the one that happened in the fall, where it's based off of whether you posted a loss or not, and a lot of computations that go along with that. So the idea here is to make it more accessible to our producers, who many of whom were affected and either tried to apply or I guess tried and failed to apply with the Business Council program from last fall.
Senator Boner, so help me to understand it, and where I'm struggling is the intent of the amendment is to say other similarly purposed funds. So that's trying to anticipate a second round. The second round, we're not going to get 1.25 billion. And so the up to, who determines whether it's 10 million or 80 million, or is the intent that whatever's there gets diverted to the ag programs? And so that's with respect to the future funding. The second is with respect to the existing CARES program. I thought that in the 11th hour, the governor had all along planned anything that had not been obligated by 12/30, he dumped into the workers' comp program and the unemployment insurance program and fully committed everything. So if I'm wrong and there's a significant amount of money waiting to be grabbed onto, that's the second thing that I'd appreciate helping me to understand. The third thing is that when you go to page 2, lines 14, 15, 16, making grants authorized by this act and consistent with the terms of the federal gift grant or appropriation from which the funds originate. That's the catch. That's the catcher, as I understood it. So I'm going to retrace my memory of what happened. There was a lot of ag agitation. Where's relief for us? The problem was the pandemic hit in the spring, and you don't know until you ship what your losses are, or until you harvest. So by the time ship time came around, prices had recovered. It was harder for people to document their losses. So the Business Council gave 4 kind of situations. If you held your calves and didn't ship them because there was no place to ship them, and so you had extra feed costs, it was a fairly limited set of circumstances under which you could recover. Now we can argue with the Attorney General's interpretation of that as to whether something might have been more generous, but my understanding is everybody, basically anybody who could qualify, qualified. And in the interim, between the spring and the fall, there was 1 or 2 different federal programs. I can't remember the acronym for that. And that provided a substantial amount of relief. So I heard some producers in my area that they didn't really feel they needed to apply. So I'm trying to understand what the need is that we're trying to get at here, because the governor had been lobbied hard to put more money into the ag interruption. And I think he kept it more generic for all businesses. And so I'm trying to figure out who is it, how many people were jilted, left at the altar, so to speak, that we've got to address with up to $80 million. And does that class even exist? Because I couldn't get the stock growers excited about this, and the wool growers couldn't get excited about it. And not the bill. I mean, I was reaching out. Do we need more relief? And I just couldn't get people that were worked up about doing anything. So what am I missing here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the root of it was the way the federal program worked. And like I had mentioned before, there's for every reason agriculture was different from just about everybody else. And the way they went about it is very specific, and that, frankly, there's things that they missed. For example, wool growers were left out of quite a bit of the calculation, from what I understand, due to a lack of communication or miscommunication at the federal level. So the state program was meant to mimic the federal one and to fill in gaps that existed. Now, when that state program stopped, there's some consternation from what I understand. And it's not my constituents, but there's constituencies in south or northeastern Wyoming. There's constituencies in the Pinedale area that were felt that the way the Business Council program operated was, it didn't give. There's a relatively short window to get your application in, and the way they worked, it was, that they maybe didn't have all the paperwork ready because the applications ended well before the end of the year. And just want to make it clear, it doesn't have to be $80 million. That's part of obviously the reason why we have it before this committee. I assumed that this committee would have a better understanding of what was left unexpended in the original CARES Act, which would help us, guide us in terms of whether 80 million is the right figure or not. But that's hopefully the whole backstory. And the reason for the bill is primarily to dictate the manner in which any future ag assistance program will be run at the state level.
Senator Hicks. You're silent, Senator Hicks.
Can't hear you.
Squeak to us, Larry.
Mr. Vice President.
I'll speak for Larry. What he would say.
You're on mute, Larry.
You don't want us lip reading. It wouldn't turn out well.
It doesn't make any difference.
He's with you all the way.
Anyway.
Now you're gone again.
Whatever connection is going from your headphones into your computer, there's something wrong.
So,
There you
not
go.
working.
Now I can hear you.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, we can.
Good. I hate these damn things. So just a couple of points. First thing, not all ag in the state of Wyoming is cattle and sheep. And you have major crop producing areas in the state of Wyoming. Some of those commodity producers, whether they're dry beans or grass seed or barley or feed barley or silage or corn, a lot of those crops were harvested late. Some of them have to go through, so I'll use the example of malt barley. It's not a matter of just tons or bushels in this case. It also has to have protein content and how much plumpness the seed is. And sometimes you don't get your payment back to know what the deficiency is on some of those commodity crops until after the first of the year, even though you may have harvested them anywhere from September to November. And so once they have to go through the grading and the processing. So I do think there was a sector within the ag community that just because of the nature of the cycles that this program was not available to. Now, I don't think it's a giant sector, but that's just one point where they weren't even able to get into it. So the other thing that I heard over and over and over, and this would be a question for Senator Boner, is the way that the ag program was set up through the Business Council was almost completely unworkable from a standpoint. It just was a situation that the criteria that they've established the protocols and what you had to provide got to the point where it was almost an unworkable program. Now, I don't know if we extend this, whether that's going to change or not, but I heard that over and over and over again. But I do want to make the point that there was ag producers out there that the nature of some of those commodities, the program expired before they were even eligible to apply.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And I heard those same concerns. One of the other concerns when we met with the governor initially, and I do want to commend Chairman Boner. He did an excellent job navigating this, and so did Chairman Hunt. And I really appreciate how on the ball they were, or we wouldn't have gotten as far as we did. But that being said, to simplify what I heard, to add to the other things was we had a bad year in 19, and we're comparing a bad year to a bad year. So we have to have an even worse year to make it look bad. And so we had talked about a 5-year average on some of these things to try to help even that out, because 19 was a bad year for a lot of folks. So that's another issue that really came up.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. So I'm reading from I'm reading from a memo or a document that was prepared by the governor's office dated January the 18th of 2021. So it's just like, this is just less than 10 days ago. And so what it does is it basically provides a high level CARES Act accounting as of December 31st for 2020. And just to go through it really quick, the amount that was actually spent by them was $903,800,000. The amount that was encumbered was or under contract per the approved programs or have been approved by SLIB for local governments or healthcare providers and is not available for reallocation. And this amount's changing daily with dollars moving from encumbered to spent. And so what there was the amount that I think the governor's office has already taken is they put 18 million in for medical facilities. They put, I think, as you said, they put 39,700,000 into the unemployment insurance trust fund. They've put 5 million into remote workforce readiness, 2.6 million into OSLI programs, 1.7 million into mental health, and that left, and they've got where they propose it is, that left really 19,500,000 left of amount that was unallocated as of December the 18th. So my concern is that when we talk about it, if we put it up to, and I know that amount is increasing, that amount that's supposedly encumbered but unspent, that amount I think is increasing. I think that $19,500,000 is getting higher. And my issue about this is, as we move forward, it would seem to me that if we appropriate it up to 80 million, that the effect would be that it would take all any amount, it would obligate the 19,500,000 that we know is unallocated, but is essentially not yet spent or encumbered. There's 19,500,000 there. And then whatever amounts additionally that end up are encumbered, but then ultimately being spent and not expended and are left. I mean, that number is increasing, and we've had discussions that number could be closer to, no one knows whether that number's another 5 or 4 million or another 10 or 15 million. But at the end of the day, with the language of that, wouldn't that have the effect of allocating all the remaining unencumbered funds to this program? And that may be what we want to do, but I think that will be the effect if we do that. So that's okay. We just need to understand what it is that we're doing, I think.
Senator Boner, and then Senator Hicks.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I simply, I offered the language as up to 80 million as a suggestion. I rely on this committee's expertise how to actually achieve that goal, and not appropriating, $80 million, of which we only have 20 million, I think it'd be prudent to set a cap on the overall expenditures so we have some direction how, but not requiring anything to be expended. And I leave it to this committee as to how best go about doing that.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I think maybe if we want to move this bill out, that we just remove the $80 million appropriation and reinsert language that would say any unappropriated or unspent CARES Act money. And so it leaves it whatever that balance is. If it's 5 million, it's 5 million. If it's 17 million, it's 17 million. But that would be the way to get rid of over appropriating or setting that limit. And it may be zero by the time the governor gets done.
So, Senator Boner, what you're trying to do, if I may, if I understand it, what you're trying to say is anything that's left over, Business Council, we want you to reopen, because the deadline's been extended for that CARES money. It's not December 30th of 2020 anymore. It's September or December. Business Council, with any money that's left over, we want you to reopen that business interruption program with a priority for any ag producers that didn't benefit from your prior programs. And I don't know how you want to express that they need to revisit their criteria. I don't know how you write into a bill that their program stank and they need to revisit it. Probably Drew could come up with something, some legalistic nomenclature that would express your dissatisfaction with their program. Maybe it just says for ag producers that didn't benefit from their prior program that they're to redirect it. I don't know. Something. They were adamant what they did was consistent with federal law. Yes, Senator Boner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a committee of the whole amendment ready to simply say that any program will be based upon the number of livestock or the amount of acres produced. And that would, and there's strong feelings in our leadership team in the Senate, that's the way it needs to go. And there's a lot of feedback from from industry groups that that's the way it should go as well. So that's part of the driving force here. And so that could be a committee of the whole amendment to dictate the basic principles of how the funds will be appropriated. I just leave it to this committee to deal with the issue of how we make this bill so that that we can appropriate whatever remains, if any, and also I'd suggest any future federal appropriation that might be left to the state that is similar. I'd like to make that determination as well to make sure that we conduct any future ag-related business relief program that's a result of federal legislation in a similar manner as what we'd be dictating with the remainder of the CARES Act funds.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a loss here. Go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I couldn't find my mouse. The other part I just wanted to ask you, Chairman Boner, is do you anticipate the Attorney General being a part of this mix, or would this be a direct appropriation that we manage how that's utilized? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, the way that my committee, the committee of the whole amendment is drafted right now is it's a conditional based on if it says if it's compliant with federal law, you will base the distributions on livestock, amount of livestock owed and amount of acres produced with crops.
So, Senator Boner, that's probably a little bit more problematic. I've had this discussion with Senator Driscoll just to say here's $1 per head or $1 per acre payment. I don't think it's going to get it. It's not going to get you much further. But Senator Perkins, help me out here. We're not supposed to get into the merits of the legislation. We're supposed to just look at the appropriation, and I don't know how we do that in this bill with the state that it's in. You have any wise words?
I think that you're right. I mean, I think that there's a good discussion, and I think Chairman Boner has a good handle on some of the broad outline. I think he might be able, he's continuing to work that committee of the whole amendment, and if it's not right in committee of the whole, continue to work on a second reading. I think what what we can do is, I think that if I remember what Chairman Boner said a minute ago, a few minutes ago, was there was originally roughly 40 million that was allocated to this, but didn't get used, and most of it got turned back. Was that what I heard a minute ago?
I think that
Minutes
Senator
ago.
Boner, I think that's correct.
There was 40 million that was distributed through the state fund, state program last fall, and it was and you have to forgive me, I forgot what the overall amount allocated, but that was well below the overall amount that was allocated.
Whatever was allocated, Mr. Chairman, whatever was allocated.
Senator Guru.
Whatever was allocated did not get used. And that's the other part about this. The
Yeah.
Business Council program worked really well. It just didn't work well for ag because of, as Senator Steinman said, what happened the year before. Basing on the year before, those numbers didn't work, and it was late coming out of the chute because this is the timing. So
okay. Well, I think I have an amendment to offer when we get to that point. I think I know what to do, and we can argue about the upper limit, and that argument will continue. But I think we got the words to get that in. After that, it'll just be changing the, filling in the blank. So.
Yeah. All right. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I believe it was 100 million. Would you agree, Chairman Boner, that we requested? Thank you.
Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a text here, I believe, from the Business Council. It was originally 90 million, and 35 million ended up being awarded to producers. So a little over a third.
Okay. Anything else before we get into the bill? And hopefully Senator Perkins will have a bit of legal prestidigitation that'll solve it all.
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Discussion or amendments?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think the way to amend this,
Please.
and whatever we do, hopefully LSO will fix whatever we screw up, but they can't fix it if we don't screw it up at first. So my effort to screw this up is as follows. I think on page 1, on line 15, I think what it is we would after Business Council, I would recommend we put up to 55 million, which is the 90 minus 35. That's where that number comes. So anyway, there'll be more discussion on that floor. So that number can be whatever we want, up to 40 million, up to 55 million dollars up to remaining from the
initial allocation.
The Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act funds. That's just that's the long name for the CARES Act funds. And
strike or similarly purposed.
Where you have for similarly purposed?
It was on line 1. I think trying to allocate funds prospectively is going to really, I'll do whatever.
Yeah, so I was just trying to get to the first part first. And so I just think unexpended, so I just think you call it unexpended, we'll call it CARES Act, and the LSO will put in the right words for that. We can call it CARES Act funds, unexpended CARES Act funds. Okay, and then I think you just strike 1, 2, and 3 at the top of page 2, and leave that language in there for the purpose of extending funding for the business interruption stipend program to use for grants for agricultural businesses pursuant to the Wyoming Business Interruption Stipend Program. And then there's a period, and then the rest of that will get cleaned up by the standing committee amendment that was offered. So I think we can make it that simple, and I think that will take care of dealing with any unexpended CARES Act funds. There's whatever it is, whether it's 19 or 18 or whether there might be 50 or 60. I know some people with hospitals have their eyes on those unexpended amounts too, but we'll have that debate tomorrow. So we can propose this. And it's also got to go through the other side of the building, but I think we could do that. And then And then I think when you get to line 8, you have this: if a COVID-19 relief account or other similarly named account is created for the deposit of COVID-19 related emergency funds, this appropriation shall be made from that account. I don't know that you need that anymore. I think that the intent of that may have been to do it prospectively, but that puts an unnecessary criteria on that. They would have to deposit into that COVID-19 relief related emergency response fund. I'm not sure that you want to restrict it that much. I don't, who knows what form this will come in and what account it'll get deposited in. But I would, maybe that's okay. But I think if we particularly make that first part, I think it's a pretty simple amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, Senator Perkins, are you then striking the balance of the legislation, or do you pick up again on line 12? So you strike the sentence that begins on if a COVID on line 8, and that goes down
Mr.
to.
Chairman.
Yes,
Point
please.
of order. I think that's beyond what the Appropriations Committee can do, is to go in there and amend the language out of the bill.
Yeah.
The only thing we're supposed to be dealing with is the $80 million appropriation.
I'm just trying to understand what the amendment is, Senator Hicks.
Well,
I'm not trying to rewrite the bill. I'm just trying to understand the amendment. Because I've got an amendment on the amendment on the amendment. So it's hard for me to follow what we're doing.
Well, the amendment, the language that we're having, I don't.
So Senator Perkins, here's what I have. I have something that has a proposed amendment from Senator Boner, and now I have your proposed amendment. I'm going to start on 14 on page 1.
I think, well, what you have is there's a standing committee amendment that's already been passed by the original standing committee. And I think, so that one's in, and that one already takes care of some of the language issues that cause us a problem. And so we don't have to, so all this amendment does is on line 15 on page 1, after business council, inserts the words up to, it strikes
55 million.
So it strikes 80 million, up to 55 million, would strike the references to 80 million. And I think, and then at the top of page 1, after from, you just say any unexpended CARES Act funds.
So not remaining from, it's unexpended.
Yeah, so I think that remaining or unexpended, I don't know that there's a difference in how that would work, but I think that's why you're doing, just program. And so once you put in from remaining or unexpended, I guess was the word, unexpended CARES Act funds, and I think you strike the balance of line 1, the balance, all of line 2, all of line 3, and then I think you're okay.
The standing committee amendment does that, and it strikes line 4 and it strikes line 5 down through stipend program.
Yeah.
And then on line 6, it strikes. It doesn't. That's what Brian, isn't that what you gave me, Senator Chairman Boner?
I thought it went and after stipend program, it inserted a period and then deleted the balance of line 7 and line 8 to where it says section 2B. I thought that's what it struck.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Please.
So there's 2 amendments. One that I sent to the committee here. One is the one in the standing committee went ahead and passed. Then there's another one, a proposed amendment, and it's identified as Prop SF 0050 S0202. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Oh man, it's getting late. Perhaps I don't have that in front of me, but it'll say proposed amendment on it. It's not, it's the one that I was suggesting for this committee, which sounds like it'd do something substantially similar to what Senator Perkins is getting at, with the exception it doesn't have any language in there with up to 55 million. But if you have that copy I sent you, it has stuff where I just went in with a pen and lined out language and inserting, you'll see my handwriting on it. That will be the effect of both the standing committee amendment and the proposed amendment that I would suggest this committee use as a reference. And it's exactly the intent, I think, of what Senator Perkins is getting at.
So Senator Boner, I think
worse?
I have the one that has both amendments, the one passed by the standing committee and the one that you're proposing for this committee. And now I'm trying to try to track through Senator Perkins. So I'm not sure where the standing committee amendment leaves off and where your new proposed amendment picks up. I'm looking for any help here.
I'm trying to open.
Let me go grab the first.
Yeah,
one.
so Mr. Chairman, I think if I'm looking at that, and I hadn't seen that before, it's very similar to what, there's not really any difference between what Chairman Boner proposed and what I said, other than the 80 million to 55, but
line 6. Oh, I see. The Second Amendment does a substantial amount of strikeouts, more so than the Standing Committee amendment.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I'd do is I'd recommend that we would simply take, and if we can, it might be easiest if we just work from Senator Boner's proposed amendment and from the one that just writes it into the bill. If you've got that in front of you.
Are you talking about the 2000? Are you talking about 0002, the second proposed amendment?
Right, but yes, I am. Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about the fact, I'm using the document that he had that says it's SF50 read-in amendment, and he's got it penciled in so you can see exactly how it affects Senate File 50. He took Senate File 50 and wrote in what his amendment would do.
Do we want to adopt that as an Appropriations Committee amendment or wait for him to bring it out on the floor?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting is that this would be my amendment would, what I'm proposing is you would take this amendment for at least the first part of it. So my suggestion would be that you, and I don't know the difference. I don't know if we have to reappropriate or if we just appropriate. But anyway, we appropriate to the Wyoming Business Council. Instead of 80, I would put $55 million. And then you have his from any and strike. And I think it's just from any and on line.
Any unexpended
CARES Act funds.
And then the balance would be exactly as in his.
The balance would be the same, down to line 8. And then I think I have a tendency to agree I agree with the Vice President that once you get to line 16, I think that starts to get beyond just the appropriation. Now you're talking about it's not expended or transferred for any other purpose. That, that obviously has to do with the appropriation, but it's part and parcel of I think that goes a little bit beyond the pale of what we're supposed to be doing in here.
But Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Senator Perkins or Chairman Boner, on page 2, line 16, you strike from this reappropriation to the end. Isn't that your amendment? Isn't that your second amendment?
Mr. Chairman, that was the part of the proposed amendment for this committee to consider. And the idea being that we're, I guess, not necessarily looking backwards at any previous program, but we're basically creating a new one. Whatever the committee's pleasure is, if you don't want to include that, I can include that in my committee of the whole amendment. So there's an additional reference to the 2020 special session laws.
So Senator Perkins, I'm trying to understand what you were saying, what Senator Hicks was saying. So that portion of Senator Boner's amendment that begins on line 16 of page 2, we should not adopt because it goes beyond the scope of what the Appropriations Committee can do.
I think Mr. Vice President, if you want to,
I think that's exactly right. You just adopt that portion and you don't adopt the second half. And then Senator Boner or Chairman Boner brings that as a committee of the whole amendment.
And we're at 55?
I mean, that's up for discussion, but yeah, that would be my recommendation.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Senator Perkins, your amendment is that we, on page 1, line 15, up to 55 million. Well, first that we have the standing committee amendment. We have Senator Boner's proposed amendment, except the second half that begins on line 16. You're moving that. And with the exception on page 1 or page 2 at the top, it's from any unexpended federal CARES funds. That's the amendment, correct?
Yes, plus the strikeout of that language on lines, the strikeouts through that he has on lines 1 through 8. Yes.
Which is part of the amendment that he's bringing, that we're not adopting the second half of that begins on line 16. Is that correct, Senator Boner?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if this committee does not want to strike the language starting line 16, that's easily something I could incorporate into the committee of the whole amendment.
Okay. Discussion on whatever the amendment is. I think we're clear. So after we make this amendment, Karen's going to write it up. Is that correct, Karen?
Yes, sir, I am, and I will give it to the attorneys.
All right, thank you. And Senator Boner, you'll squire that amendment along. So it's actually conceptual. Do we want to try and, assuming it passes, are we going to try and kick this bill out here tonight or wait until we get that amendment back from the attorneys to review? Senator Hicks.
I would just suggest that it would be good to have you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Boner review that before you send it to the attorneys so that you've got concurrence, and that may slow it down a few hours, but you could have that to them by 8 o'clock in the morning. But I think it would be more than behoove us to have you guys make sure that you agree that's what the amendment is before we send it to staff and then have them go back and redo it. Just a suggestion.
Okay. And then we'll bring that out as an Appropriations Committee amendment. All right. Further discussion? Hearing none on the amendment. All those in favor, just raise your hand. Okay, passes unanimously on the bill. Further discussion on the bill? Hearing none.
Call for
Karen,
a question.
Take the roll, please, Karen.
Yes, on Senate File 50 as amended, Senator Drew.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kinski.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Senator Perkins.
Aye.
As amended, 5 ayes.
Thank you, Senator Boner. I will be at your disposal as early or late as you need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Early preferred. I'll be up by 5.
I'll get something sent off tonight with you and Karen, to you and Karen, and we'll get started on that as you finish up your work here on appropriations.
All right, thank you. Next matter for our consideration is Senate File 44, Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program Funding. And do we have anybody here to help present on the bill? It was somebody from Minerals, correct, is who we needed?
I'm sorry, sir. We do have someone, just a moment.
Okay. Okay, we don't have anybody from Minerals Committee to present, though.
No, sir, we do not.
But we have Luke with us. That and Todd. That's better than anybody we get from the Senate.
Whose expertise on old dumps is superior, Luke's or Todd's? I'll defer.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll start off, and then they're handed off to Luke for any cleanup and details.
All right, please.
All right with you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is what I refer to as the annual bill to update the cease and transfer priority list. We've been doing this since 2014. I thought it would be helpful, and I'll run through a little bit of a background before I turn it over to Mr. Rush. But this began back in 2013 when the legislature created the Municipal Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program. And what it does is it provides funding assistance of up to 75% of eligible project costs for landfill operators that want to either do some closure or cease their operation or go to a transfer facility and transfer to a more regional facility. So we started back in 2014 when the legislature approved the 52 eligible projects with an estimated cost of $96 million. And that has been in place since then. And then where we are today, and what this bill really does is it identifies the remaining sites, and there are 19 remaining or facilities rather. 7 of those are in the transfer category and 12 are in the closure category, and the remaining cost is estimated at $28 million. And then what I would say is that we have, through the program, it's 31 projects have been funded for a total of $46.5 million. And what the background is, the legislature deposited a total of $59.9 million into the program for activities. And I can give you the years in which those funds were populated by the legislature. So it was $20.5 million in 2014, $6.4 million in 2015, $17 million in 2016, $2 million in 2018, and then $14 million in 2019. There was no request in 2020 because we felt that we had sufficient funds to fund the remaining projects, and that remains the case.
So before you go any further, I just wanted to ask, I heard you say there were 52 projects to begin, 31 funded, 19 remain. I get 50. Did we drop 2 projects?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so some projects dropped off where they weren't going to move forward, that the municipality decided that they weren't moving forward with the transfer facility.
All right, thank you.
And then just to wrap up on my part here, right now there is 17.9 million remaining in the program accounts. There are two funds, Fund 554, which is the grant portion, has 11.3 million, and in loans available with Fund 555, there's 6.6 million. So I'll stop there, and what I'd like to do is have Luke go take you to page 3 and walk you through the list of projects, because that's what's changed, and that's the reason we do this bill every year is to reprioritize based on who's ready and not. So
before you do that, so how many millions short are you? You said 17 million balance and 28 million for the 19 remaining projects. I come up with 11 million short.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, yeah, there's 17.9 million remaining and 28 million in estimated costs remaining. But keep in mind that these projects are funded at 75% out of the program. So that means we need 21 million through this program on the state side, and then the match from the local landfill operators is 7 million. That's the 25% share. And so, yeah, it appears that, you know, we're at about 18 million. We need 21 million, but costs have been coming in below what the estimates are. So that's one thing. And then the other is we're starting to see the repayment on the loans that have been distributed over time. And so those are coming back into the account. So with the combination of those two things, we think that we're going to be fine in terms of the amount of money we need to fund this program.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Parfit. So on when the loan repayments come in, are they automatically reappropriated over to the either loan or the grant side so they can keep moving forward?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they go back in, I believe, and Mr. Esch can correct me, but I believe they go back into the loan account.
Okay, thank you. So just come
out
out of 150 out of 50. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, it's a revolving fund.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, Luke.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yeah, so there's just a few minor changes from last year's priority list. The community of Lingle had requested that they be added for their landfill closures, so they've been added at number 11 at $350,000. Additionally, the number 6 priority facility, the Bighorn North transfer station, there's been 2 changes at Bighorn North, both their transfer station and their closure. We received an updated engineer's estimate for that facility, and due to expansive soils, their estimated cost increased. The transfer station increased by $150,000, and the closure increased by $1.1 million. So those are the changes from last year.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Esch? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I always lose my mouse. Being new and on this committee, I'm just seeing the loan to grant ratio that is in the fiscal note. Have we ever talked about maybe changing that ratio a little bit so that we weren't granting so much money and more of it was a loan? Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Parfit or Mr. Esch?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, yes, I believe that the legislature had lengthy discussion about the ratio of grants to loans. Now, the decision on grants and loans versus loans is made by the State Loan and Investment Board. So we review the projects with the Office of State Lands and Investment, and then it goes to SLIB with our recommendation, but they make the final decision on how much should be granted.
Senator Hicks, you had your hand.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we're through with that section, but we'd just like to go over the carcass program disposal. And Todd, based on the conversation that we have previously, if you can give any updates on that, because I don't see any language in this bill that would get to the issue of optional if they want to maintain those. Where do you intend to roll that out?
So Senator Hicks, just so that you can help the rest of us understand, give us a little bit of background, because the number one priority is a carcass management project, and I think you're talking about something different. Is that correct or no?
No, that's the number one priority, but if you go down to subsection C, it says, shall only be for infrastructure necessary to haul or compost.
Okay. Gentlemen?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes, we recognize through conversations that we've had with you that this is a high priority. As far as making progress, not directly related to the bill, but based on our conversations, we are in the process of establishing a meeting or setting up a meeting with the town of Baggs first, as we discussed, in terms of what their issues are and what they're dealing with carcass management. Beyond that, we've had some other discussions with other entities on more of a macro scale discussion, which would be statewide, on carcass management issues, which we think is appropriate as well. But that would include the County Commissioners Association, the Association of Municipalities, probably somebody from the Department of Agriculture, and maybe somebody from YDOT, because they are involved with that as well.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
I just want to make that one thing really clear. This is not, and I'm going to repeat, is not just a bag solid waste disposal district issue. So I never asked for you guys to go down and meet with Baggs. It is a statewide issue that I've heard from many different areas of the state of Wyoming. I appreciate the efforts to talk to Baggs, but quite frankly, they were neither the first nor the last to bring this issue up with me. Again, I don't want to just have the discussion. I want to understand the nature of the discussion of the alternatives associated with the geotechnical aspects of actually doing dead animal pits versus composting or hauling. And so let's let the science lead us to where we need to go. And I guess that's the nature of the discussion. So what I would ask, to please keep me in the loop on those discussions, and any materials are distributed to either counties or municipalities through that process. Quite frankly, Todd, I'm just going to tell you, I got a real lack of trust right now on this issue with the department. And so I want to be kept in the loop to the maximum extent possible with any information that's disseminated. But I do want to make that clear. This is not just a City of Baggs issue.
So, Mr. Parfit, maybe you can help me understand. When I was mayor in Sheridan, that we had a lot of landfill issues. Dead animals weren't part of them. I thought when a deer got hit, eventually somebody just drags it off into the borrow pit. And then I have a constituent that YDOT would bury animals on her property instead of in the borrow pit. I'd have to intervene to get them to bury the animals in the right place. What am I missing? Are you now got a regulatory mandate that those all have to go into a landfill?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a point that I wanted to make. The decisions on solid waste management are local issues. They're local decisions. We don't mandate how they manage the dead animal waste. What we do implement are the requirements for solid waste municipal landfills, as far as where they're located, whether or not they have a liner. The liner requirement is one of the big issues, but that's in statute. That's in the solid waste statutes. But that's required. Now there is an alternative to that, and I think that's what Senator Hicks was referring to, is that there's science out there. There was a report that came out that suggested that if the geology and the soils are appropriate, then you don't have to have a liner. And we agree with that. We've seen that study. We agree with the study. And so it's just a matter of those communities having to make that demonstration that the soils and the geology is appropriate, that it's protective of groundwater. So we don't disagree.
So, Mr. Parfit, you said what you're doing is what's in statute. If the statute were changed, is there some change that could be made in state statute that would you come back and tell us, well, the federal law won't allow us to do that, or could we change something in state statute that makes it more flexible?
Mr. Chairman, we believe the flexibility exists with the language that's in statute now that would conform with the science report that came out that Senator Hicks is referring to. It's that we just have to implement that the way that it is designed. Would it create a primacy issue? It very well could be if we went away from the liners. I mean, going back to why that liner language is in the statute, I think in the first place is that of 112 municipal landfills that were investigated, 86 landfills had groundwater contamination. And we had, for years prior, had permitted these municipal landfills with the thought that in arid states like Wyoming, that you wouldn't have enough leachate and precipitation to cause enough problems to contaminate the groundwater. And we've seen in our studies that we did in the 2006-2008 timeframe, I believe that's when it was, that just wasn't the case. And so we were looking at, through the landfill remediation program, a price tag of about $280 million. And that was in 2013. So that's probably well over $300 million price tag to remediate that. That's why we ended up with the cease and transfer program and why we ended up with the landfill remediation programs that we have.
Senator Hicks, anything else? Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Well, I was just wondering in general, because we're in the process of putting in a processing plant and some of the USDA laws are loosening up as far as your wastewater, how it leaches away as long as it's not pooling, that just a rock leach field is appropriate. And some of those things are loosening up. I just want to know overall concept wise, when those things start to loosen up at the federal level, do we respond to that right away and with the same measures, or are we stricter than the federal government? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr.
Chairman and Senator Steinmetz, the first thing is that we're not trying to operate it more stringently than the federal government. We would track any changes if they're loosening something along those lines. We would certainly take a look at that, and if that's within our ability to implement, we would certainly take a look at that and work that through either statute or rule process. I'm not too particularly concerned about us keeping up with the speed of the federal rule changes, because that typically they give you plenty of time to make those adjustments to any changes that they have. But typically those changes are going the other direction as well.
Anything to follow up, Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would hope we would react fairly quickly when we see something loosening. And I guess the question would be is if we're keeping an eye on that, and or are we this is very impactful to a lot of our small processing plants, which is very impactful to all of our producers and our supply chain and our consumers having an affordable and healthy product to consume. And so everybody benefits from us being able to manage this in a way that works out for everyone and is not overly restrictive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else? Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and just real quick, I don't want to, for the lack of, no pun intended, beat a dead horse here, but, yeah, and I agree, Todd, you don't mandate, but you certainly regulate. And through those regulations, you can force an entity to do whatever you want through your regulations. In fact, that's a conversation that we had back in December when we were, myself and Representative Larson and Mr. S. and you on the budget. And it was inferred that, that at that point in time, you would just regulate to the point that you'd get them to do what you wanted them to do anyway. But that being said, now let's get to the groundwater contamination. You know, and I let's follow the chemistry and the geology. There's a fundamental difference between how volatile organic compounds move through groundwater than something like nitrates. And so again, to characterize that there was 86 potential groundwater contaminations, I would agree with you. But the nature of that groundwater may have absolutely nothing to do with a dead animal pit. And until we've got empirical data that says that those were associated with that based on the nature of groundwater, I think it's a broad brush to come out and imply that we had groundwater contamination associated with dead animal pits. So again, those compounds will move different through the soil based on the chemistry, the charge, and all that other stuff. Then nitrates will move much different to a certain degree than volatile organic compounds based on soil chemistry. But I just, again, I hope we can get over this issue and get around. But that's my concern, is not the mandates to regulate.
Mr. Senator Hicks, Mr. Parfit, I want to wrap this thing up here pretty quick.
I don't have anything else to say.
If I could just,
Mr. Parfit,
very quickly.
well, you sure?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if it came across that it's our actions are to regulate to get what we want, that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think there was a misunderstanding in what was being said, because that is not the way we operate. The way we operate is we work with those local governments to give them the options that are available to them. They'll look at the economics, and it's their choice on which way they want to go. So, you know, just a misunderstanding on that from my perspective, because that's not the way we operate, nor should we. I would agree with you. As far as the science, it wasn't our intent to suggest that those 86 landfills were related to dead animals. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe that to be related to municipal solid waste. I go back to the study that you had referred to, and we agree with your analysis of that, is that under the right circumstances, the geology in the soils, you can have dead animal pits without a liner. And I think that's the big issue, because that's a cost prohibitive thing in a lot of instances if you have to have a liner. But if you can make that demonstration, there are a lot of soils in Wyoming that would meet that criteria, that would be sufficient to not have a liner and dispose of dead animal pits. And then the last point I would just make, if I could, is that Senator Hicks in particular, yeah, we'll include you with all of the meetings that we have on this macro level, because I think we want to hear the different perspectives. But we're not hearing the same things from the communities. So to the extent that you can share the information about which communities have been in contact with you, that would be helpful for us to be able to reach out to them and have those conversations.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just say one brief thing with regard to Senator Steinmetz and Senator Hicks' questions. We really have been reaching out. We've had communications with the Wyoming Meat Processors Association, and based on my conversations, I've kind of found out that that's a target audience that we really haven't been able to reach out to since. And so I think we're going to do some targeted outreach to that group. And based on my conversation, there was some misinformation that they had about how the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division operates. So I think based on those conversations, I think we should be able to make some progress.
So I'd appreciate it from both of you gentlemen if you could, I'd ask is just a one-page policy guidance. I'm not talking about a rulemaking or anything that sketches out the broad outlines of this, that there's a misconception that the department is requiring lined pits or composting of all dead animals, and that there are soils that are suitable, and here's the circumstances. And if it's not a municipal landfill, then they don't even need anything from you at all. If I understand, they can just go out and dig a dead animal pit. I think you said you just have the authority to regulate municipal landfills. I'd just like to see some kind of policy guidance so that people know what the broad outlines and the edges are of the issue. It would be helpful to me.
Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to do that. I would also just refer you to, we wrote a memo to the Legislative Service Office because they had requests from some legislators, and that's January 8th, 2021. We can forward that to the committee as well, and that's a little more comprehensive.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I could just take a second, I just want to, I had been in communication with Luke here a couple weeks ago on an AML issue, and he took a second look at that and the ability to try and give some Wyoming contractors a chance at some reclamation projects. And I just wanted to say thanks. I appreciate your help on that, Luke.
Thank you, Senator.
Members of the committee, any further discussion? If not, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Any amendments? Hearing none, Karen, please call the roll.
Senator Kinski, we do have one person in the waiting room. Would you like to take public comment before we do that
Oh,
vote?
please. Yes, please. Public comment.
I'm bringing in Jeremiah Riemann from.
Mr. Chairman, members of the.
Good evening, Mr. Riemann. I just admonish you as Governor Friedenthal once admonished me, we're about to do the right thing. Don't get us confused.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I actually, based on the testimony, hadn't planned to offer any comment, but we are supportive of the bill and appreciate your action on it.
All right. Thanks, Jeremiah. All right. Karen, please call the roll.
On Senate Bill 44, Senator Grew.
Excused.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Senator Perkins.
Aye.
Acting Chairman Kinski.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 excused.
All right. And I think that concludes our business for the evening, unless anybody else says anything for the good of the order. All right, everybody have a great evening.
Thank you.
I think we